What's up, guys? It's Robyn Lively here. How are all of you spookaroos doing? It's me, it's Robyn Lively, the original Teen Witch, and this is Spooky AS with Eric D. Top that!
Top that indeed. This is Spooky Ass Shit. I am Eric Dwell's, and that really was Robyn Lively, yes, the star of 1989's Teen Witch, and the subject of tonight's episode. That's a little pre-Halloween treat for all my spookaroos out there. How's everybody doing? You know that I have not been feeling very well, and I've been very busy, of course, with regular day job, and of course, witch finding in Salem. Welcome to all the new listeners who might have just found out about the show because you happened to bump into me on the street out there. Sorry if I was nasty to you out there, but hey, it's kind of my job. I'm actually a good dude, though, in real life. And this is the podcast, Spooky Ass Shit, that I told you about. So tonight, we are going to be talking about Teen Witch, but before we dive into that, I want to remind everyone about the website, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode, including the ones no longer available on Apple Podcasts or your favorite streaming service. And you can also find links to all of our social media. We are at Spooky Ass Shit on both Twitter and Instagram. And you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. There you can also join our closed group for spookaroos, true blue spookaroos. And guess what it's called? The Spookaroos. That's right. So go ahead and search that on Facebook and you will find us. It's a closed group, so the public can't see all the weird things you might want to talk about. But I have to be honest with you guys, it doesn't get that weird. It's a pretty good group of people. It's mostly just memes and stuff like that for now. And once in a while we get into deep dives about the episodes. But it's nothing crazy. I don't want people to get the wrong idea and think that it's a bunch of like serial killers hanging out together or something. It's not like that at all. I do apologize if I sound a little bit off on this recording. Again, still fighting through this cold. They tend to stick with me lately. If I get a cold, I have it for at least 2 to 3 weeks. So I'm trying to kick it out, and I think it's mostly gone, but it's still in my nose, as you might be able to hear. So aside from that, we should be good. Now let's talk about Teen Witch. This is what you call a cult classic movie. It came out in 1989, but it was it was definitely a flop at the box office. It cost $2.5 million to make, but according to Wikipedia, and I have a hard time believing this is actually true, but it's on Wikipedia, and IMDb seems to agree with it as well. So, but take that with a grain of salt, but it says that the movie in its initial run made less than $30,000. So that's a flop. That's a big time flop. It did have some stiff competition when it came out with Field of Dreams and Pet Sematary, but also I could see where this wouldn't be the kind of movie that would necessarily be a hit in the movie theater, because I think its real target audience was maybe slightly younger, maybe young teens, tweens, you might say, that wouldn't be going to the movies on their own necessarily. So if there were other, if there were teenagers going to the movies, they're probably going to go see Pet Sematary or something like that. Maybe not Teen Witch. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass, but you get what I'm trying to say. I could see where it would be more popular on home video and through cable re-airings, which is how I discovered it. And I'm sure how many of you discovered it. It's part of the family channels, although now I don't know what it's called now. Whatever the family channel is called now. They do the 13 Nights of Halloween or whatever, and it's always in rotation on that channel of their 13 Nights of Halloween movie, so I'm sure that many of you only discovered it through that as well. So if you haven't seen the movie, maybe this isn't the best episode for you to listen to. Maybe you should watch the movie first and then listen to this episode, but on the other hand, I don't think it will hurt your enjoyment of the movie to know the stuff that I'm going to share about it tonight, and I don't think you necessarily need to have seen the movie to enjoy this episode. However, I think when I discuss some of the things I discuss, you're going to want to at least see parts of the movie. And the good news is all the really good parts are available on YouTube. The movie itself is a little bit harder to find, although I'm sure you can purchase it on a streaming service. It doesn't seem to be free on any streaming services. The movie stars Robyn Lively, the woman who did the lovely intro that you just heard, as Louise Miller. And you might know Robyn Lively as the love interest for Daniel LaRusso in Karate Kid Part 3. She did a lot of other stuff too. She was in Twin Peaks. She's done a ton of stuff actually. She's been working consistently ever since the early 80s, I believe. She got her start on Punky Brewster, as a matter of fact. And she's just been a real workhorse since then. And she is also the sister of Blake Lively, who you might know from Gossip Girl. We also have Joshua John Miller as Richie Miller, and he is probably my favorite thing in the movie. He gets a lot of hate from some people, but some people know exactly where it's at, and they know that Richie is actually the best performance in the movie. And we're going to talk about that as we go along, but you might also know him from another 80s movie, Near Dark, vampire movie. He's also been in tons of TV shows in the 80s and 90s, and it looks like he kind of gave up on acting, but he does more writing now. He did the screenplay for the movie The Final Girls, which I have not seen yet, but it's getting decent reviews on Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes and everything, so seems like it might be worth checking out. I'll have to look into that. Rounding out her family, we also have, in a little winking nod role as the father of the witch, we have Dick Sargent as Frank Miller. Dick Sargent, of course, is the second Darren from Bewitched. So this is the second time he's played the father of a witch. So that's the family, and this movie does begin in the family home. I'm going to give you a spoiler here. I'm going to tell you the whole plot. It's basic. It's a very basic plot. We've seen it a million times. Unpopular girl. Something happens to her to make her popular. In this case, it's witchcraft, but it could have been, becoming a cheerleader or, any number of things that we've seen in movies time and time again. She, for whatever reason, becomes popular. Then her best friend feels left out. And at the end of the movie, she realizes she's had to trade a lot to become popular, and it's all very superficial. And she wishes she could just take everything back and make it the way it was. And she makes up with her old best friend, and they become friends again. And she goes on a little bit stronger for coming out the other end. And that's what's going to happen in this movie as well. So that's the basic outline of the plot, but we are, like I said, going to dive into some things that I found particularly interesting about this movie. I will say, when I decided to cover this for the show, I had not seen the movie in many years, but it was always on TV growing up, and I remember watching it. The last time I probably watched it in full was probably high school. I do remember that my high school girlfriend was into the movie. She used to sing the Top That rhyme, What's Up, Ash? And, I distinctly remember watching it in her parents' basement, and I think that's probably the last time I watched it the entire way through before I decided to do this episode. So now that I'm doing this episode, I decided to watch it again. So I just watched it last night. And I have to say, when I approached it, I thought it was going to be like one of those like so bad it's good movies along the lines of Troll 2 or Miami Connection or Samurai Cop or something like that. Or The Room, like those kinds of things. And it doesn't really hold up in that way. There are still moments which are quite enjoyable in that way. But it's not like every moment that there's something crazy happening on the screen. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe they did this. There are moments like that. There are definitely moments like that, and we're going to cover them. So that's what we're going to talk about, and I'm also going to be pointing out some little observations here and there as we go. The movie opens with Robyn Lively playing Louise in bed, and she catches her little brother under her bed, and he's eating chocolate cake and reading her diary. So we're right off the start. But this is Richie, the little brother we're talking about. Now, Louise, for some reason, and I don't know why this is, but I want to call her character Tina, and I'm not going to promise that I won't do that at some point. So if you hear me say Tina by accident, I mean Louise. No idea why Tina is stuck in my head, aside from maybe Bob's Burgers, but I don't even watch that enough that it would be like stuck in my head like that. I don't know. Anyway, Tina, God damn it, I just did it. Louise is not popular at school, but she's not like a full-on nerd either, because they show nerd characters and she's not like in their clique either. And these are nerds, like the kind of nerds you would see on Saved by the Bell, like the stereotypical, like pants pulled up to their chest, giant horn rim glasses, that kind of thing. Her best friend is Polly, who is played by Mandy Ingber. And Molly Ingber, I'm getting names wrong left and right here. Mandy Ingber, she was a series regular on Cheers as Carla's daughter, and this is the danger of researching shows like this. They can send you into quite the rabbit hole, and this is a good example of that. Because did you remember that Carla's Family had a spin-off series from Cheers? I don't remember that. I have no memory of that at all. But I think now that this IMDb page mentions it, I think I do remember her playing Carla's daughter on the show. There was my Boston accent coming out for you when I talk about Cheers. Now, the problem with Polly that I have throughout this entire movie is that she drinks plenty of haterade. This girl is like one of the most toxic people I've ever seen. Her biggest problem in the movie is that she makes a series of unfortunate hat choices, but she's also just got like little comments about everybody. And they start picking on Randa, who is like the popular pretty cheerleader girl that's dating the hot guy Brad. We're going to talk more about those two in a minute. But they, Luis lives across the street from Randa, and Randa is the pretty girl, and they see her getting picked up by her boyfriend, and Polly immediately starts talking shit about her and like picking on the way she dresses, saying that she's dressed like too immodestly. She was wearing a long sleeve shirt and a skirt that almost went down to her knees. So, I mean, it was form-fitting, and the girl had a nice figure and everything, but it wasn't like a slutty outfit. It was just like a hip, trendy 80s outfit. So, I don't know about that. I think Polly has some of her own issues that she needs to work through, and we're going to see more evidence as the movie goes on. One thing I want to point out, this actress, Mandy Ingber, she was reportedly very difficult on set. And she admits that this probably was true, but she says that's because the director seemed like he had no idea what he was doing. And I looked at his credits on IMDb. There's only like 3 things on there, so she's probably not wrong. And also, I've seen the movie, so more proof that she might not have been wrong. I did notice that both of the girls, Luis and Polly, are wearing trench coats. I know it was the 80s and it was a different time and everything, but this is like just about 10 years before Columbine, and trench coats will take on a whole new meaning, especially with the unpopular outsiders. So, I don't know, just saying, something I noticed. It's something that sticks in my head as someone who was in high school during the time of Columbine. Randa, the popular girl that we mentioned, she is played by an actress named Lisa Fuller, who also happened to be in the movie Monster Squad. So another 80s classic for her. And her boyfriend is Brad, played by Dan Gauthier, or Gauthier, I suppose. I'm not sure how he pronounces his name. He plays Brad in this movie. He is mostly known for soap operas, but he was also on some teen soap operas, those being Melrose Place and Beverly Hills 90210. We follow all the kids to school, and we see some boys rapping in the hallway. Now, this movie gets credit for being one of the first movies to show white suburbanite kids listening to and appropriating hip-hop culture. Now, we come to Mr. Weaver's class. Mr. Weaver, he looked very familiar to me, and I was trying to figure out where I knew him from. And actually, it's Shelley Berman, who is a very famous comedic character actor. But what I know him from mostly, he's done a ton of stuff, and I'm sure you would know him if you saw him. But what I know him from mostly is Curb Your Enthusiasm. He plays Larry David's father on that show, and as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, of course. I'm not picturing him bald. He's wearing a toupee in this movie, but he is really, well, first of all, Curb Your Enthusiasm is just a great show. It's one of my favorite shows. I've watched it all the way through several times, and I'm in the process of watching it again. I'm on season 8 right now, so we're going to have to start all over again pretty soon. But the thing that strikes me about Mr. Weaver is that Luis comes into class late, and he's like a total dick to her. And he mentions that she's so smart that she skipped grades. So, but then he's like giving her like a super, super hard time. And it just seemed out of place, but they do say that everyone knows that Mr. Weaver is, an asshole, basically. But he finds a little scrap of her diary, which her brother was reading. She had tucked it away into her notebook. He finds that, and he reads that out loud in class, and it's all about Brad and how she wants to make out with Brad, and Brad's in the class. So she's all bummed out. The next scene is one of those weirdo scenes that I was talking about. One of those great scenes that you watch and you're like, what am I watching? This is the I Like Boys scene. If you're familiar with this movie, you know this scene. If not, you've got to check it out. I'm going to play a little clip for you of the song in just a minute, but the character comes in and she says, hey, I've got the new cheer. And they just start playing this song and dancing around like goofs all around the locker room, but very choreographed. So my question is, what is the conceit here? Is this actually supposed to be a new cheer that they've worked out? Is this a cheer that they've worked out ahead of time and that's why they all know the movements? It's not a cheer that they could actually do on the field because they use the lockers, they use the top of the lockers, they use the showers. They're doing like magic tricks, essentially, with the showers. And Luis is not a part of this. We find out later that she actually is a cheerleader. I don't know if she was supposed to be a cheerleader all along, or maybe after she gets her powers, she joins the team. But she's in the locker room at the same time, but they appear to be wearing bathing suits, which they don't explain at all, although later in the movie there is a swimming pool scene, and they are wearing the same suits. So presumably these are their bathing suits. So I guess the conceit is that this cheerleader comes in to the rest of the cheerleaders and says, hey, I got the new cheer, and they all just start practicing it? Is that what's supposed to be happening here? And then why do we keep seeing Luis's reaction? And what is her reaction supposed to be? She's just watching, like, she just keeps peeking out from the lockers. It's really weird. And there's really no reason why this should be in the movie. It's a full-on musical number in a movie that doesn't have musical numbers for the rest of the time, with the exception, of course, of Top That. And maybe Shauna's concert if you want to count that later on, which, we'll see. Luis then stalks Brad for a while. She watches him from a distance while he's at football practice, and he decides that he's got to play with his shirt off. Now, I did not ever think about this when I was watching the movie because, Brad's just not my type. But I have a friend of mine who happens to be a gay gentleman, and he mentioned that Brad and the actor who plays Brad, Dan Gauthier, he is like a very sexy man. And when he took his shirt off, I was like, yeah, you know what? I can see that. I could see if I was like a little gay kid watching this movie as opposed to a little straight kid watching this movie. I would totally be into that dude. That's a good looking cut dude. He's got a little bit of 80s hair going on. He could have used a little trim in the back instead of the little kind of feather that was very common in the 80s. But otherwise, yeah, that's a good looking dude. I get it. I totally get it. And he's a well-rounded guy because not only does he play football, he's also in the school play. Now, Luis and Brad do a scene together to audition for this play. And she does a good job, even though she's only got about 2 lines. And you think like, oh, maybe she's going to get it. Her friends are supportive and everything. But no, Kiki gets the lead female role and Brad is cast as the lead male. Well, okay, so what does Luis get? She somehow gets cast as costume mistress. But that's not a big deal, I guess, because the drama teacher is Mrs. Malloy, and she is played by Marsha Wallace. Are you familiar with that name? You've definitely probably seen her performance before. Not in person, because she's a voice on The Simpsons. She was Mrs. Krabappel for many, many years before her untimely passing. And if you're from a generation previous to that, you might remember her from the Bob Newhart show. Anyway, she is, I assume, she's not the director, because she says the director wants to cast other people, but she must be like the drama teacher. In any event, she's at least in charge of the costumes. And she and Luis spend a good amount of time in the movie hanging out backstage, talking costumes and getting the costumes ready. She also, at one point, finds an amulet that she gives to Luis, which becomes important later on because it's, I don't know if it's really supposed to be the source of her power or just a thing that helps her direct her power, like a magic wand might be for other people. But in any event, it's a very special, magical amulet. That night, Luis is riding her bike back in the rain, while Brad and Randa are driving and making out at the same time. Brad accidentally runs Luis off the road. Now he stops, he pulls over, and he goes over to help her out of the ditch that he drove her into, and he even offers to drive her home. But she's too embarrassed to say yes. Brad, at Randa's behest, takes off, and Luis starts to walk back. She realizes now that her bike is too damaged, and so she goes to use the phone, but the phone doesn't work, so the payphone, I mean, they used to have those things back in 1989. So she goes to the closest place that does have a phone, but it turns out to be a spooky old house. And guess what? It's not just any spooky old house. This is the same spooky old house that Michael Jackson chases his love interest into in the music video for Thriller. This house is not abandoned in this movie, unlike Thriller. This time it belongs to Madame Selena. Played by Zelda Rubinstein. Now, you might remember her because she was in Poltergeist. She's the little 4'3" lady who says, "This house is clean," and go into the light. And she's got a very distinct voice. She was also the narrator of Scariest Places on Earth, if I remember correctly. Selena reads Luis's palm and discovers that she's a witch who will gain her magical powers on her 16th birthday, which just so happens to be very soon. In fact, it's so soon, we cut right to her birthday party. She's having a birthday party and her whole family is gathered around, but nobody comes. And this is when Richie starts giving her shit, and he's got another classic little brother Richie line right here.
No one's coming to your sweet 16 party, Louise.
Now here is more evidence that Polly is actually kind of a shitty friend. She calls Luis to say that she was just at the mall buying Luis a birthday present. Now, I mean, we've all been there. We've all had to do last minute shopping. Sometimes you get caught up in but as far as we know, Luis is Polly's only friend and vice versa. So it would seem like if you were going to get a present for someone, you might do it more than 10 minutes before the party, or actually less than that because the party's already happening and Polly is not there. But she calls to tell her that she overheard Randa while she was at the mall, and Randa is having a party that same night, and that is why no one is coming to Luis's party. Next, we have another random scene. This is a sex ed scene, and there's a character that we're introduced to named Fred, which I thought was a guy named Rhett, but apparently this is a different rapping guy. Anyway, he does a weird little song with alternatives for the word penis. And then there's a condom chant, and there's no main characters in this scene. There's no reason for this scene to be in the movie, aside from comedy, I guess. I guess this was supposed to be like a funny scene that they threw in. I don't know, man. It was just weird. It's just another example of like a random thing where you're like, why is this in this movie? So maybe the Polly actress was right, and this director just didn't know what was going on. Now, Randa, she asks Luis if she would be willing to take her cousin out on a date. And Luis is like crazy inspired by this idea. She's like, oh my God, this is going to be great. I'm finally like going to hang out with the popular kids. And Brad's going to get a chance to see me. And this is going to be great. But of course, it turns out that Randa's cousin is actually a nerd. And also, he's a bit sexual assaulty. Now, this is the night where Louise gets to use her powers for the first time. She accidentally, because now this guy is, like I said, he's very handsy. They go to a dance, then they're driving home, and he is like quite forceful, and like I don't know exactly what he's up to. It looks like he's trying to like force her head down into his crotch while he's driving. But I don't blame Louise here. She accidentally, however, sends him to another dimension and leaves just his glasses sitting on the seat and almost crashes the car. She drives back to Madame Selena to find out how to bring him back home, but Madame Selena is not home. So she runs home in a panic. She gets into a fight with her little brother Richie, who gives the best line delivery of the whole movie, and this is a line that I quote all the time. Not the most famous line from the movie, but my favorite and my favorite delivery of a line in the entire movie. Take it away, Richie.
You think you're hot stuff because you went to a dance. Dreamer, nobody wants to date you because you're a dog. A dog! A dog!
At this point, Louise becomes pissed off at Richie, and she turns him, accidentally, into a dog. They freak out for a little bit, and then she throws him into the bath, and he turns back to Richie. And understandably, he is freaked out. We're going to see how this affects his life later on. The next day, she goes back to Selena, and Selena explains that because Louise is so young and inexperienced in using magic, her spells are still very weak and easily reversible. And in fact, that just something simple like putting the dog in the water, that's how easy it is to reverse her spells. Water will make her reverse her spells. However, in this discussion, they do not mention the missing date. We don't know what happens to him. Presumably, the spell will wear off and he will pop back into existence with perhaps a strange story to tell. But if that does happen, we never learn about it, not through this movie. She also now mentions that she has a boy that she wants to make fall in love with her. Now, Madame Celine, she's like, well, listen, I can help you with that. That's no big deal. I'm going to make him your love slave, which I find problematic. I don't think that's what you want to use. I mean, it might be what you want to use witchcraft for, but I know in real Wicca, which in my humble opinion is slightly different than witchcraft, but that's a debate for another day. But in their beliefs, usually what you put out into the world comes back to you threefold. So you wouldn't want to force people to do something against their will because that's going to come back to you threefold. But there's other problems with that. Anyway, she does get the spell, and she does lure him to her home with the promise of studying. She brings him up to his room, which gave me flashbacks to high school. By the time I was in high school, my mom was very sick, and she'd already had 3 kids in the house, and she wasn't really paying like a super ton of attention to what I was up to, and I was a pretty good kid anyway, so there was no reason to. I didn't give her a lot of trouble. But I was basically allowed to have girls in my room, and most of the time things didn't get too out of control because I had to share the room for the most part with my brothers until I was toward the end of high school, and then it didn't really matter. But I do remember the same girl whose house I watched this movie in the basement of, her mom was okay with us being in her room. Her dad was super not okay with it. And I do remember that it like became a thing one night. There was like a scene one night. So that just brought back some memories. But apparently Louise's parents are all for it. The only thing is when her dad leaves the room, he does go to close the door and then thinks better of it and leaves the door open. I was glad to see that at least. Anyway, Louise cannot officially go through with the love spell. She decides against it. The next day, she and Brad get to talking in study hall, and Brad complains that Randa is obsessed with the prom and she won't shut up about it. Then Louise asks why he puts up with her and calls her superficial. I'm sorry, aren't you the girl who's like considering using witchcraft to like make this man your love slave? And what do you know about him? Like, she doesn't seem to know all that much. You just know that he's like a good looking guy and he seems pretty nice, but there's no like deep burning reason why she feels this connection to him other than what she writes in her diary. All we know is she wants to make out with the dude. She wants or at least make out with him. And, I'm just saying. And then she's looking at Randa and like basing on her looks like, oh, she's like an airhead and she's like, she's only into superficial things. I think again, when you're pointing that finger at somebody, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you, Luis. And I think you're taking some of Polly's haterade. Back to class, Mr. Weaver admonishes Luis for talking in study hall. He picks up her birth control pills, which have spilled out of her purse. She goes home that night and she makes a voodoo doll of Mr. Weaver. She uses it the next day to force him to undress in the middle of class. And as he's stripping, the principal comes in shouting, "Mr. Weaver!" Now, this principal is not a main character. He's only got about 2 lines in the movie. You only see him briefly in 2 scenes. But my keen eye detects all. Also, IMDb is a big help. But the principal here is played by Gary Schwartz. And a lot of you, that name might not mean anything, but if you're a child of the 80s, you might remember him from a little show called Zoobly Zoo, on which he played Bravo Fox. Now, Louise, like we said, she is a fan of the drama teacher, or at least the costume mistress of the school, and she hooks her up with a lottery win and a rich count named Armando. And this is the first time we see like Louise using her magic to like help somebody else, but she kind of gets a feel for it because in the very next scene, this is the most classic scene from the movie. This is Top That. Even as a kid watching this movie, you knew that this scene was ridiculous. And of course, it's filmed in a way, I think that was kind of the intent. But looking back on it now, it's even more ridiculous than they probably meant it to be. I'm obviously going to play the clip for you. But basically, to set up the scene, Luis and Polly are riding their bikes. Polly has just confessed that she has a crush on Rhett, who is one of the rapping boys. And she just thinks he is the bee's knees. She calls him funky. You know what? I'm just going to play the clip. But the point is, Louise is going to use her magic to help Polly flirt, I guess, through a rap battle.
I'm king, and they know it. When I snap my fingers, everybody says sure, I'm hot, and you're not. But if you want to hang with me, I'll give it one shot. Top that.
No, I'm not in the mood. Oh my God.
You can dream until you're blue, but you will never top that.
Let's go back the other way. No, just go up and talk to him. Are you kidding? I'm so embarrassed. Look at how funky he is. I will never be hip.
I'm hot, and you're not. But if you want to hang with me, I'll give it one shot. Top that. Top that. You can do all that you can, but you'll never top that. Top that. So top that.
Supersonic, idiotic, disconnected, not respected. Who would ever really want to go and top that? Such a waste of pretty face, but hanging in your nose space. I wish that you would take a look and really stop that. Top that. Well, stop that. I don't really give a about trying to top that. Top that. Stop that. I wish you finally take a real look and really stop that.
What's this?
Stop that.
But give.
Top that. I don't really give a about trying to stop that.
Top that.
Big deal.
Stop that.
Unreal.
You can try till you blue.
I will make a fool of you.
Top that.
That's what it was like on the streets in the 80s. So there it is, the classic Top That scene. Now, Louise goes back to Miss Zelina, Madame Zelina, and she says that she wants Brad to like her for her. That's why she couldn't go through with using the magic spell that would make him fall in love with her. But then she asks to make a spell that will make her pretty and popular. Well, I guess, I mean, there's a lot of conflict in a teenage girl, I suppose. Definitely in this teenage girl, because she wants him to like her for him. Wait, I didn't say that right. She wants her to like... Nope. She wants him to like her for her. That's it. But then she wants to be somebody else so that he will like her. Then they go to Shauna the Rockstar's concert, and she's like, oh, I just know she wants to give me her jacket. And of course, using her magic, they get backstage, and of course, Shauna the Rockstar does in fact give her her jacket and a signed photo. And then she transforms into the most popular girl.
I'm gonna be the most popular girl. I'm gonna be the most popular girl.
And of course, we have a montage of her being very popular, and Polly feels left out. But the thing is, Louise actually does try to include Polly. She sits with her at lunch, and then a big crowd gathers around, and Polly kind of gets pushed out of the way, but that's not Louise's fault. And Louise makes several attempts to try and talk to her, and Polly just is like bitchy about it the entire time. I really don't like this Polly character. If it wasn't for the Top That scene, there's really nothing good about this character. Now, Brad and Louise are driving home from school one day, and Brad takes her to a creepy old abandoned house. And I guess this is supposed to be romantic. But ladies, I'm here to tell you, if he drives you to a creepy old abandoned house and you're not the kind of chick that likes creepy old abandoned houses and you didn't talk about this ahead of time, run. Run very quickly. But Louise follows him, and she's like, oh, this is cool, I guess. She takes off her high heel shoes, and Brad kind of playfully like leads her around as he like takes off his shirt, and then they make out, and the camera fades, so we don't know what happens after that. It's a lot of very close up on open mouth, tongues going back and forth. It's not a particularly sexy scene, in my opinion, and Robyn Lively happens to agree with me. She says that this scene now mortifies her. Back to the school play. Kiki is playing the lead, like we said. She's one of the cheerleader girls. Louise accidentally breaks her leg when she says break a leg to her. You know, the old theater superstition. And apparently now Louise is the understudy. So they're like, oh, Louise, you're going to have to go on for her. And Polly is once again being a jealous bitch, and she's like, oh, you pushed her, didn't you? Which, you know, she didn't, actually. Then we get Richie the bellman. This is another classic scene with more classic deliveries by Richie. He is now afraid of his own sister, but perhaps she's used a little magic on him to turn him into a more obedient son, because he's cleaned the whole kitchen, and his mother wonders if he's on drugs making this happen. But he is dressed as a bellman, and he comes to deliver Louise her breakfast in bed and her homework. Well, I don't know, just let Richie tell you.
Louise! What? I prepared you a wholesome breakfast. Your morning paper. I took the liberty of ironing your homework.
There's a scene, too, earlier on, I forgot to mention it, where she uses her magic to make people tell the truth. And you had just heard that Rando was telling Kiki, who of course has the lead in the school play, she was telling her like, oh, you're such a great singer, and so is one of the other friends. And they were like, oh yeah, you should definitely always get the leads in the musicals. You're so great. And then Louise does this tell the truth spell, and then Randa's like, oh, actually you sing like a dog, and it's no good. You're terrible. And then that causes a fight between the friends, and they end up pushing Kiki into the pool because Kiki points out that Randa's roots are showing, and that pisses Randa off. Brad wants Louise to go to prom with him, but she says no because she doesn't feel that it would be right since he only thinks he likes her because now she's the most popular girl due to her using a magic spell. She doesn't lay it all out for him like that. She just says no when there are things that he doesn't understand, but that's the real reason why he won't go. So Brad goes with, his girlfriend, by the way. They never really mention that. Like, they don't break up or anything. He just all of a sudden pursues Louise and at least makes out with her in that old abandoned house, if not goes all the way with her. But he goes to the dance with his girlfriend, Randa, and then Louise shows up with Madame Selena. Now, earlier, she had gone back to Madame Selena and said, you know what, Madame Selena, I don't want these powers. I think things are getting out of hand, and I just want everything to go back the way it was. Like, my best friend doesn't like me. Brad likes me, but he likes me for the wrong reasons. I just want things to go back the way they were. But Madame Selena's like, hey, my magic never worked for shit. Your magic is working. You have that amulet. That's the source of your magic powers, or at least a helper in your magic powers. You have that because you had it like in a former life, and you've always like had witchcraft in your family, and you're a reincarnation of a different witch, and she's trying to get her to stay with it, but Louise must convince her because she does go to the prom with Louise, and there's a really long scene where like really nothing happens except Louise like comes in and like looks around, and she's like, yeah, I'm gonna do this, and she takes off her amulet and she throws it across the room to Zelda Rubinstein, and then she dances with Brad, and that is where the movie ends. So it's a little bit ambiguous. Does giving back the amulet like cancel all the magic that she did? I hope not, for Marsha Wallace's sake at least. I mean, she got hooked up. Everyone else, like, nothing really super amazing happens, but she got hooked up. And I would hate that she loses everything that she gained. One thing I want to talk about is I feel really bad for Randa in this movie. I know we're supposed to feel bad for Polly. Like, Polly's the friend that's left aside, but again, for reasons I stated, I don't think that's really the case. I think Randa is really the victim here because she's not really seen being mean to Louise or anything. Like, yeah, when they run her off the road, she doesn't seem all that willing to help her. But, if that's not the worst thing in the world. And she doesn't like it when people point out her roots. She does diss Kiki's singing, but only because Louise put a spell on her. Before that, she was lying, a white lie, to her friend and saying no, you got a great voice. She wasn't saying it in a mean way, and then she's honest with her and tells her that her voice is terrible, but that's only because Louise put the spell on her. So it shows actually the opposite. It shows that she actually is a good friend because, you do tell your little white lies like that. Side note, in real life, the actors who played Brad and Randa got married, and they're married to this day. All right, listen, I wanted to record this episode with somebody, and I had people lined up, and for one reason or another, things didn't work out. I tried to get other people in here, and I swear to God, so many people wrote to tell me how much they loved the movie, and I said, oh, great, you want to come over and talk about it? And they all said no. It was the strangest thing. Then I put the call out through Facebook, through the Spookaroos group, the True Blue Spookaroos, and also my personal Facebook page. I gave a Google phone number that people could call and leave their comments. I thought, well, if I can't get a full-on guest on this episode, it might be fun to have people call in and give their thoughts and opinions, talk about their favorite scenes, their favorite songs, and hear those along the way. And people, liked the post and everything. I got exactly one phone call. I'm going to play it for you, though, because it's a doozy. I feel like this episode could have been better and would have been better if I did have somebody here, somebody to play off a little bit. This movie, like I said, was not the laugh a minute, oh my God, I can't believe this is actually happening, kind of so bad it's good movie. It's fine. It's a fine movie for a tween, I think, would probably really like it. and you know, it's got its crazy moments like we talked about, but they're not there like consistently enough that I'd be like, oh my God, you have to see the entire movie. You can watch the clips on YouTube or listen to the clips here and get the idea of it and be fine with that. That said, I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be either. People talk about the terrible acting and all that. I don't think that's really true. I think it's fine for what it is. I think some of the performances are good. Actually, I think Shelley Berman's performance, and it's kind of a small role, but I think he's actually quite good in this, and I think that our friend of the show now, Robyn Lively, is good in this too. So, I mean, you know, as far as her appearance in Karate Kid goes, look, Robyn Lively is a beautiful woman, and she's remained a beautiful woman. She's actually very pretty. In fact, if you go to the Facebook page, and if I can find a way to post it on Instagram, I'll try that too. But I'm going to post the actual video that she sent me so you can see, because this was all done through Cameo. This is not a commercial. What I'm about to tell you is not a commercial. But Cameo is a service. You can go to cameo.com, and you can pay a certain amount. Different people have different prices. Some of them are quite reasonable. Some of them are insane. But you can get them to record a message that you write down or answer some questions. So they don't give you very much space. They give you like, you know, a tweet's worth of space to say what you want to say to the person and ask them the questions you want to ask. So in a minute, I'm going to be playing the rest of the clip with Robyn Lively. I'll probably just play the whole thing through. She does the little show intro and then answers a couple questions about Halloween. Since I knew I'd be doing this episode right around this time, I thought it might be good to hear some of her Halloween memories. And it's like a different request than she normally gets. I thought, you know, that might be good for her. But before I play that, I do want to play the one phone call that I got for you. Now, honestly, I was going to leave this out, but I think this is a fun call. This is my friend Julie, and I actually have a long history with her family, going back to doing summer theater when I was like a little kid with her little brother. And then later on in life, I became good friends with her older sister, and through theater, and we used to go to like trivia night, and Julie would be there too. So I kind of got to know Julie a little bit more through that too. So anyway, she was kind enough to call in, and like I said, I find this call very amusing, so I will play it for you now.
Hello, this is Julie. I don't remember much about the plot of the movie, except small little pieces, but what I do remember is supersonic, idiotic, destructive, not reflected. Who would ever really want to go and top that? Such a waste of pretty face hanging in your mother's face. I guess you want to top that, top that, top that. I don't really give up about trying to top that, stop that. I think you really take a real look and really top that. Or something like that.
And now, Robyn Lively answering my one question that I was able to ask her via the Cameo website. She's since raised her prices, by the way. I got in on the basement level, on the bargain level, before she bumped up her prices. And actually, the actress who played Polly is also on this website, and she was charging more from the get than Robyn Lively was. So take it away, Robyn.
Hey, so Eric D wanted me to share with you guys my favorite Halloween costume. I have a couple. I really loved being Miss Hannigan from Annie, because that's one of my favorite movies. Loved it. And I also loved it when my family and I were the cast of Stranger Things. That was a blast.
Well, I'd like to thank my special guest for this episode, Robyn Lively and Julie. And you guys are definitely, both of you, the most popular girl. Until next time, don't be afraid.
No one will want to go to the dance with you because you're a dog, a dog, a dog.